So there will be a slight change here. We're going to start the evening with Mr. Salah Ahmad, who is a permaculturalist in his own right. And he's going to start off talking about permaculture for the first 20 minutes. And then after that, we'll hand over to Imam Afroz, who will have a presentation. So the projector is onto this wall here. So if the ladies at the back or anybody cannot see, maybe you would want to readjust yourself, come more to the center of the hall so that you can see the screen later on. Imam Afroz will go on, and then after that we'll wrap up with Dr. Umar, inshallah. Okay, so without further ado, I think we'll welcome Salah. The stage is yours.
I didn't actually prepare a presentation for this on it. I will go through a little bit from my notes, which I prepared 2 days ago. Hopefully, is it better now? Oh, okay. Sorry. My head is too big for this. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. My name is Salah Ahmad. I'm very honored actually to be talking to you today. It's a big honor being with Sheikh Omar and Sheikh Afroz. Subhanallah, I was a big fan of Sheikh Omar. I always on YouTube, and Sheikh Afroz, I'm blessed to meet you at last because I heard a lot from Tinker Amir and from other friends. So alhamdulillah, it's a big day for me, being sitting here. So I hope you get a little bit of information from me, and then I'll hand over to the shuyukh, inshallah. A little bit about myself. I'm sure nobody heard about me. I have a small channel on YouTube, not a lot of likes yet, but it's growing. My name is Salah again. I am originally from Jordan. I'm Palestinian Jordanian, and I grew up in Amman and in a city. I'm a city boy. Not as big a city as KL. Every time I come to KL, I'm like, whoa, this is a city. Where I grew up is a village compared to this. But yeah, I'm a city boy and not a village person at all. But subhanAllah, somewhere deep inside me, I always wanted to be outside of Amman. I always wanted to be in nature, and I always wanted to be playing with mud and playing with water, and always looking for a better alternative than the life I used to live. And as I grew up, I studied food technology, and it's a weird industry. I tell you that, it's a very weird industry. It's called food industry, but it's a very weird, and I don't know what the right word is, but I didn't want to stay in the food industry. I worked in factories, I worked in service, I worked in sales of chemical materials and packaging materials, and I was involved in it heavily. And afternoons, after I finished my work, afternoons I used to volunteer with a group in Amman called the Arab Group for the Protection of Nature. And through that group we used to fundraise a little bit of money to support Palestinian farmers who were affected by by the building of the separation wall on the lands, and a lot of these farmers lost trees, lost crops, lost land, and lost access to land. So we used to fundraise and help these farmers plant more trees on whatever land was left to them, and just get them back on their feet after what they've been through when Israelis built the separation wall on the land. So through my volunteering with this group, we also worked with small farmers in Jordan, supporting them to value add on their products so that they get a better deal for their efforts. And through this group, I got introduced to permaculture. And funny enough, I was actually in Australia. I was working in Australia when I got introduced to permaculture, and I was sent a link about a Palestinian farmer who converted his piece of land into an abundant permaculture farm. And I was like, oh, what is this permaculture? It seems interesting. Let me look into it. And I started reading a little bit more about it. And I found out this guy basically is producing his olive oil, his herbs, his eggplant, all of that through the system. And the link was that I was in Australia, and Australia was the birthplace of permaculture. And I looked into how can I get involved in this, and I found that there was someone called Jeff Lawton who has a project in Jordan, which I didn't hear about when I was in Jordan. I only heard about when I was in Australia. So I was like, oh, I better do a course with this man. So I went to his farm. I did a 2-week course. It's a permaculture design course. And during these 2 weeks, I was basically re-educated in a lot of things that I've already known, but it was like looking at them from a different perspective, from a perspective that makes sense, from a perspective that actually connects us to what we really are and what nature is, and how life should be. And I was like, okay, I think I better quit my job and come and spend some time with Jeff Lawton. So I went back and saved a little bit of money, and in my sales job, which I hated, I was knocking doors for a Murdoch company, Foxtel, and I hated it from the bottom of my heart. And I was like, I better save a little bit of money and invest in volunteering on this farm. So I went and volunteered for 3 months, and since then, that was it. That was my life since then. I was involved in permaculture for the last 4 years with Jeff, and experiencing it on the farm, in Zaytuna Farm in northern New South Wales, teaching, consulting, and now working on developing sites throughout the world, inshallah, to educate people about this and get people more involved and connected to what they actually deep inside want, which a lot of people cannot find until they experience that. That was my story with permaculture. I don't know if anybody heard about permaculture before. Can I see some hands? Oh, I can see some faces I know. All right, beautiful. So permaculture is short for permanent agriculture, and it came out as an idea for designing land, for designing habitats, ecologies that are working with nature and not against nature. If we look at agriculture now, it's one of the biggest causes of destruction and pollution on the planet. Funny how what we eat and what we think is good for us is actually causing a lot of destruction, from erosion, from water management problems, from loss of soil fertility. So instead of it being an industry which is for the betterment of Earth, agriculture now is the biggest cause of the destruction of Earth. And permaculture is a design science that looks at producing this food, producing our needs, producing our energy, producing building our habitats in a way that works with nature, in a way that is not against nature, and seeks at the end for the betterment and for the regeneration of this land, of this soil, which is subhanAllah, something that as Muslims we should actually be doing by default. This is something, it's part of our ibadah, to make sure that what we do is for the betterment of where we live, for the sake of the generations coming after us. And that's why permaculture makes a lot of sense, since it is based on 3 ethics. It is based on the ethic of people care, earth care, and the return of surplus. The return of surplus for the betterment of earth and for the betterment of people. And when you hear these 3 ethics, you think, well, this is Islam. It's like, it just makes so much sense, because I'm actually caring for people, I'm caring for earth, and I'm returning all of that to these systems through my work. And I'm doing ibadah through just working on the land, through actually working with the soil, through producing food. I'm doing ibadah by default through just working on the land. So it made a lot of sense to me, and I decided to, subhanAllah, I put my intention, I put my effort into it, and it's taking me now to Malaysia, where I didn't expect to be 4 years ago, and now we're trying to establish a demonstration site here. Because without demonstration sites that show people what can be done, how it can be done, people will not be convinced. People will always think, oh no, this system doesn't work. We are so entrenched in our fossil fuel dependent lives, and this system doesn't work. So, and there's a lot of skepticism about it, and that's why establishing these demonstration sites is very important, and involving people in them, and showing them how it can be done is one of the most important things that we as permaculturists can do, because we need more and more people to come and see that it is doable. And now we in Kuala, with Tinku Amir, we're trying to establish this site on Taman Pertanian. I'm still trying to say it properly. And we're turning it into a permaculture site that will showcase what can be done in the tropics, because every climate has its own specific requirements and needs and characteristics. So what can be done in the tropics in terms of sustainable food production, water harvesting, building sustainable energy, and hopefully we will develop the site slowly but steadily into having it as a hub for people in Malaysia and the tropics in general to come in and have a look. Sorry, I didn't even look at my notes yet. Where was I? Yeah. It's the thing is with our life now is that a lot of the food that we're consuming, we're buying, we don't know the source of it. We don't know what actually it went through until it reached our fridge, our table. We haven't been through this supply chain, and how destructive that supply chain can be in terms of pollution and reliance on fossil fuel, reliance on unsustainable energies. So this connection, which a lot of people don't have, can be to an extent problematic for us from the inside, because it's like it's bad energy. It's like we're eating bad energy when we're consuming food that is not coming from a tayyib point of view, from a tayyib supply chain, let me say. And the closer the food is produced to where I live, the more tayyib it is, because the less it had to go through processes and energies that are wasted over just transporting it. So we try to get people to connect to these local farmers, to these local producers, if not produce it on their own land, on their own balconies, through small scale gardening. Look at what you prefer. What's your favorite vegetable? What's your favorite herb? Maybe start gardening that. Maybe start with. Don't say I probably don't know how to garden. I don't know. I'm not good with soil. Every time I touch the plant, it dies. Just put the idea out of your head and start gardening small scale. What you like. I like eggplant, so I'll probably be gardening eggplant as a beginner, and then develop that a little bit, and maybe start other vegetables and other herbs. So starting gardening locally is very important. After that, look at what we can do in terms of looking for local suppliers, small farmers that I can support, small farmers that I can work with, small farmers that I can market their products and go buy directly from them. This makes my connection to that food a little bit more real than going to a fridge in a shopping center and buying it. So that connection is what we miss in our life, and that connection is what we look at changing through permaculture. Masanobu Fukuoka is a big Japanese. He's the father of natural farming. I don't know if anybody heard of him. He once said that as human mankind, we marvel at what we created through the destruction of the earth. We marveled at what we created through the destruction of the earth. Like the octopus that pats himself on the back for getting fat through eating, by eating his own legs. So we're actually patting ourselves on the back for destroying the earth and not worrying about generations coming, where they're gonna farm, where they're gonna get their fuel from, where they're gonna get their energy from. We have no idea about how can that be sustainable, that life. And there's an ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah that explains that exactly. It explains the same thing that Masanobu Fukuoka, subhanAllah, ayah 205. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ومن الناس من يعجبك قوله في الحياة الدنيا ويشهد الله على ما في قلبه وهو لد الخصام وإذا تولى سعى في الأرض ليفسد فيها ويهلك الحرث والنسل والله لا يحب الفساد وإذا قيل له اتق الله أخذته العزة بالإثم فحسبه جهنم ولبئس المهاد. It's when he goes away, he destroys throughout the land to cause corruption and destroy crops and animals. And Allah does not like corruption. And when it is said to him, fear Allah, pride takes hold of him. Pride takes hold of us all the time. Because we don't know. Maybe we don't know better, and we try to get people to know better. And inshallah, through this initiative with the Komuniti, inshallah, our site in Kuala will be a small beam of light for this. Thank you very much.
Hello? Okay, thank you very much, Salah. So, if everybody would like to find out more about what Salah will be doing here in Kuala Lumpur for the next year or so, should we check out Murujan.com? Salah? So, Salah, if anybody would like to find out more about what you'll be doing here, where do we go to?
We have a Facebook group, of course, and it's called Permaculture Taman Pertanian Botanical Garden, Kuantan, Malaysia. It's a very long name, but yeah, that's what I could came up with. So, but yeah, please, if you have any questions, I'll be here, and I'll actually leave my cards on the table, and you have my email. If you have any questions, just get in touch with me.
Thank you very much again, Salah, for that introduction. Just to recap again, if anyone wants to find out more about Salah's project here, it's Permaculture Taman Pertanian Kuantan. He's going to leave some of his name cards. He'll be around. So Salah has already set the context for tonight about what living well with the earth would mean and setting up a demonstration site for inshallah people to come over and check it out. So now I'm going to pass over to Imam Afroz, who is very familiar with this topic.
بسم الله ما شاء الله والحمد لله وكفى وصلى الله على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. In thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, my gratitude to both Ismail and to Hawi al-Khairat to allow us to have this conversation here in this space. It is not often that you get a space which is built to sustain a community of knowledge, that you are able to speak about topics that seem to be outside the realm of the discussion of Islam, although this particular topic is in fact right in the middle of the issues in relation to our ibadah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I'm going to try and skip as many slides as possible because we have Dr. Umar here. For two reasons I'll skip. One is that we need to hear more from him, and secondly, some of my slides might not be the best to be presenting in front of him, so I'll try my very best to see how we go with that. When you travel, one of the things that people who are experts in well-being often mention is that you should ground yourself, that you take your shoes off and touch natural ground. And this is often the case when you travel from, say for example, the southern hemisphere into the northern hemisphere, the northern to the southern in that regard. This helps you to ground and orient yourself. And the etymological origin of orientation is to be able to tell the east. And I was educated by Dr. Omar a few days ago in relation to the importance of the primal cardinal point of east itself. The reason why I bring this up is because when you look at the word arida, its original meaning arises from to ground oneself, and there is a connection to this because it gives us an essential nature and meaning of what ard and earth is all about. And when we speak of the earth, it has three fundamental purposes that helps us in its ontological, essential meaning, as well as its eschatological, and ultimately where does this all take us to, reality. Because the problem in today's world is we just see the earth, as Sidi Salah has said, that it's about us marveling, creating things by destroying the earth. Is that better? Not really? Okay, I'll try my very best not to. It's not me who's crackling, I just wanted to let you know. So these three fundamental purposes, first and foremost, and I won't go through the details of all of this because there's much to be spoken about each one of these three fundamental purposes of the earth. The first one is that it is an ayah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a sign that helps us to decipher knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we destroy the earth, then we are destroying the signs. And an example that I often use is, imagine if I was traveling from here to go to Kuala Lumpur airport to catch my next flight to Sydney, and the signs are destroyed, or the signs are pointing the wrong direction. I might actually end up on the permaculture farm of Sydney Hammer, and that might be too far from the airport itself. Although I might enjoy myself over there, but I've not fulfilled my purpose ultimately in that regard. So it being an ayah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Secondly, the earth is also a means. It is a place where we take the means in our journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This earth is essentially that. Imam Ghazali speaks in detail about this, particularly in his Mizan al-Amal, where he explains three kinds of people, and briefly over here, the first kind of person who comes onto this earth, onto this land over a boat and starts to grab everything. He forgets that actually he's supposed to go back to the boat, and by the time he gets to the boat, he dies before he dies because he's got so much weight on himself. And the second group of people he refers to as the golden mean, are people who come to this earth and benefit from it, but take that is needed and ultimately return to the boat to take their journey into the hereafter. And the third group of people are the people who know that this earth is a very short time, and so they simply prepare the least amount of things without much temporal enjoyment of this world, return to the boat and return who are the most successful. So we have to take, we are given the permission by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take the means. We have to take the means, but we rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What has happened here is that we have started to rely on earth and what earth gives us as if it sustains us, when in fact it is a means. The third is that it's a mazra, it's a farm, but it's a farm not for this world. It's a farm where we plant our seeds for the hereafter. And the fruits and the seed of what we plant here, and this is our amal al-salihat, that we will see the fruits of this in the hereafter. And what is happening is because we are no longer planting for the hereafter as the general human society is concerned, then we are seeing the manifestation of what we refer to as global warming. And global warming is only global warming as a symptom of the human soul having a fever. So just like when we actually have sick, then we actually have fever out here, the reality is that global warming is simply a symptom of the state of the human soul. And the state of the human soul is because we are not well. And this is what I want to speak about today briefly in relation to being well and what are some of the things that are causing us trouble in this regard. So first and foremost, when we look at the human existence, we as a society, when I say we, inshallah ta'ala, there is nobody here, but when I'm saying we, I'm talking about the human society as a whole, that when we look at the human society, we have broken ourselves as if we are about what we refer to as the body, mind, and sometimes simply the psychology, but really we are only returning to the discussion of the soul. And this reality that we are a soul with a human body, that we are only starting as a human society, and we as Muslims have not only a rich resource on this, we are the ones with the resource about us. That we are a soul that needs to be taken care of, and this body is its vehicle by which we will ultimately fulfill the three purposes and then take our journey to meet our Lord. So really we have the body and the mind, and here I'm speaking about the mind as the brain, not mind as the intellect. So we have the body and the mind on the physical side, and we have the heart and the soul on the spiritual side. And our spiritual side of the world is terribly affected. That in fact the outward, the human limbs are simply an animation of the state of our soul. And so what we're seeing that the human beings are doing, and we are doing, is a corruption, as Sidi Salah has very eloquently mentioned, that continues to destroy this earth. And the number one reason for this particular destruction is not the government. And in fact, it's not even the cooperation, although they're both cooperating in the destruction of the earth. It's actually you and I, and the disease is called Hubb al-Dunya. Its modern descriptive experience is consumerism. That we are simply consuming. The governments and corporations ultimately cannot sell things. Let's talk about cooperation first. Until we buy, they will, as in fact George Galileo actually said in one of his corporate speeches in such a terrible manner, how proud he was in saying, and listen to this carefully, that If we as a corporation had to sell our mother to make a profit, we would do it. وَأَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. So the corporation is a manifestation of this evil that simply is interested in profit. So if we as human beings, as consumers rather than consumerists, that we simply were to turn to those things which were allowing us to take benefit in this world in order to return to our Lord, then the corporation would also change, because they'll have to change their profiting model as to how they can in fact ultimately sustain that. So my concern today here, I have a lot to say about the corporation, I have a lot to say about governments, but this is not the time and place nor the context by which I want to speak about, because I want to talk about ourselves. And we have the ability to change this world, and particularly we as a Muslim community, we have been empowered with gifts by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through His beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that if we follow that, then we can not only provide propositions to the rest of the world, but actually provide a pathway as well as hold hands of people to walk on that pathway. And the work of the likes of Jeff Lawton is immense, because they are not only speaking about this, they're not only talking the talk, but they're also walking the walk. And say, Salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you great reward, facilitate all that you're doing, and bring the best out of this, not only the fruits from the permaculture of this earth, but also in the hereafter. And in this regard, I want to mention that when we speak of the earth, we often reduce ourselves to think about the environment as the green things out there. But when we speak of the earth, and particularly environment and our well-being, there is an ecosystem, and there are four of those that we have to take into account. The first of them is the natural and the built. So the natural environment, without a doubt, but also the built structure. And Dr. Umar spoke about this in the last couple of days in relation to the golden section, and how the Quran has not only a recognition of beauty, but it is in fact hardwired in its essence in regards to beauty. So this aspect of how we create a volume and what we create in the built environment, if it was done not only in terms of its aesthetic beauty, but also in relation to its environmental footprint, then we would recognize it as beautiful, and we would recognize it as a thing, as a construction, not that it ultimately leads to destruction, but in fact allows sustainability and also regeneration around its spaces. And this is one of the things that permaculture can quite well do for that. So the built and the natural. It's interesting, as a brief point, one of the, if I could say, moderate atheists, that might be slightly paradoxical, but I'll leave that aside for the moment, Alan de Botton, and he said, he has a book called Religion for Atheists. And he says in the book that if you look at the religious architecture, and specifically and particularly Islamic architecture, that these were environmentally sensitive architecture, and they provide to society, to civilization, solutions in relation to built environment. And I think we have to return to understand this matter as to how we can take benefit from that. And inshallah ta'ala, we have another opportunity another time to really speak about architecture. I happen to have a little bit of knowledge on architecture, and we'll one day speak about that. Secondly, it's about the physical and the mental environment as well. It's our social, our community, our career, our finance, etc. If we are not safe at home, if there is domestic violence at home, etc. If we have oppression at work, if we are unable to have workspaces that are suitable for us to be able to work and also return to our home and our family, then we are going to see a degradation of society, and ultimately we will see those things on earth. And I'll show you in a few minutes, inshallah, how that actually is occurring, that our physical and mental states are leading people to actually eat food because of poverty and their own psychological impoverishment, that they lead to, and this is well established, that social constrictions leading to psychological constrictions as well lead people to ultimately eat processed food because it's the cheapest thing around. So there is a direct link between all of these things, and I'll speak briefly about that a bit later on. The third is social. That was a social and economic. The third is physical and mental, and this is about what I actually just mentioned about our physical health, our mental health. The previous one was about our work, our society, and our social structures around. And lastly, we can't forget the spiritual environment. Because, and I want us, if there is one message that I can leave here tonight, and that is that if we walk away from some of the technicalities that are going to be spoken about, and Dr. Umar will be speaking specifically in more detail about this aspect of the spiritual reality of our existence on this earth and responsibilities as well as our meaning here, and I'll leave him to speak much about that. But we cannot forget the reality that there is a spiritual environment in which we live in this regard, where we have to transcend the material, right? So that we are in this world but not of this world, that we own things but things don't own us. And you know where these quotes are coming from. They're not my brilliant mind, because I'm not brilliant. They are of the statement of Imam Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. I also want to mention to you, as my little statements on the bottom, I hope you're reading that they're good quotables and tweetables. If you want to take them, I'm very happy for you to take them. That in the game of life, this material world is half-time school. That we have to recognize that there is another world we have to get to. Right? So don't end up playing only for this world and in this world. There is another world, and we have to prepare for that. We have to prepare for the second half. I will briefly mention this particular hadith that we are all aware of, and I won't spend much time here. There is much to be said about it here, but it's slightly, I think, potentially not necessarily directly connected. And here is that there are 5 tests of our well-being that we will be asked on the day of judgment, about our youth, about our health, our wealth, our time, and our life. And each one of these interact with each other in relation to, for example, youth and health, and it's about our ability, all the abilities we have and how we grew unable. In other words, when we have the ability, we need to do things before we are unable to do things. And secondly, our health and wealth is about our abilities to earn, to actually have the health and the wealth, and how you acquire it and how you spend it. Again, we do not have enough time over here, but I hope you realize that the number one destruction on this earth in relation to this earth, the environmental degradation, is riba. Because riba supports the consumer market out there, where we are having to pillage this earth to create things in order to fulfill our desires, which are all built on money, on wealth that doesn't exist. And in relation to wealth and time, it's about our life and how we spend it. And I'm sure you're going to connect the dots over here. I don't have the time to go through many of these details. I apologize for that. And lastly, time in our life itself, it's really about the time you spend to seek the knowledge and to act upon it. That your ilm is in fact converted to amal. And what does that amal look like? And know that this is about the virtues that we have in ourselves, the virtue of shuja'ah, courage, the virtue of iffa, the temperament. I'm going to put this across to you with a slightly selfish reason, so that the next time I come and I run one of these workshops, you can actually come and do a 2-day workshop in detail. It's an entrapment, so I'm declaring my interest as far as this is concerned. Courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom, that they are connected to these virtues that are inherent in ourselves, and much to be spoken about. The point being is that if we are not well, then how are we going to actually get the virtues out ourselves? Why am I saying that? It's because, let me give you a simple example. We will have our shuyukh who will speak to us, for example, that you should not be angry. We know that anger is a disease of the heart, and we understand that. But then something happens, we go and we get angry. and we say, actually, hang on, I know this, why did I get angry? One of the fundamental problems is this, that in order for the brain to internalize that knowledge base from memory of information to internalize knowledge and intellect, we have this something called neurotransmitters that in fact pass this message on, which ultimately hit and become internalized into our consciousness. And it's beyond memory. These neurotransmitters entirely depend on food. If you don't eat the right food, then all of this theory is not going to be converted into the internalized reality that we are supposed to be. That anger is not just like a theoretical word there. You can actually experience yourself well before you are getting angry, so that you can then actually calm yourself down and not in fact react in anger. So your food is the number one pathway or block in relation to your well-being or otherwise. And this is the reason why I'm going to now get into food consumption and production, or food production and consumption. Here again, I'm going to try and only give some very simple, brief explanations for you. And this particular set of slides that you see here is actually about how you and I say that to a large extent to be true for us, you and I sitting here. And I'm really also hoping that we walk away from here slightly shuddered and say, "Ooh, I think we are actually contributing to the corruption." And so we can then motivate ourselves to change our own lives in order to, inshallah ta'ala, change the world that we have around ourselves. So really, I'll give you the example of milk. What's happening in the milk industry? We are all, many of us are, eating cereals with milk, and milk is just everywhere. But milk not only directly, but also in other products as powdered milk, etc., which is added in there. So listen to this carefully, my dear brothers and sisters. Just for your information, 70% of your milk in Malaysia is imported. 70% of your milk. So let's look at some figures over here. It might not be exactly these figures applying to you, but I would like you to think about where your milk is coming from, and whether you're buying local milk and are you buying organic milk. I'm not yet even worried about its nutritional value. I'm simply going to give you an economic example of how we are probably involved in oppressing people and also destroying the earth in the same time. Because cattle, and particularly for meat and milk, are the highest contributors, larger than cars and vehicles on the road in relation to the global warming that in fact is occurring out there. The amount of carbon dioxide emissions from cattle for many reasons is so significant, to the extent where the clearing of the Amazon is heavily dependent on the cattle industry and what we are consuming in that regard. So briefly, approximately 50% of the global south and global north people actually own the production of milk. Meaning that when we talk about global north, we essentially are talking about Europe, we're talking about the United States of America, North America, and we're also speaking about Australia, a place where I come from in this regard, although it's in the south. So this term is usually used to refer to the rich countries, global north and global south, because most of the countries who are actually economically poor are usually in the southern hemisphere. So just keeping that in mind, 50% of the global south and 50% approximately of global north actually produce milk. But in the global north, a country, for example, where I come from, and by the way, you are also included in that in regards to milk, may not be for economic reasons overall, but certainly for milk, that only 11% of us in the global north actually control milk. In other words, we are not the ones who are producing it. But in the global south, 89%, 90% of the people are producing milk. So if you go to Africa, for example, if you go to the country I come from originally, Fiji, then we are actually producing our own milk. This story changes dramatically in this regard. So we have just spoken about the milk that is controlled by people. Produce, remember, 50-50. In terms of control and who controls our milk, we don't. We simply go to the supermarket and buy it. In the global south, they actually have that milk in the local market from the local place. But look at the consumption. That although 50% of the milk comes from global south as well, they are not able to consume any more than 22% of that. Why? Because you and I need that milk. Some African farmer has to feed you. I want to take a pause there, my dear brothers and sisters. Don't look at a television and cry for 2 minutes because Amnesty International showed a photograph of a dying African. You and I, when you were drinking milk, we're probably stealing it from some African brother or sister. How are we stealing it? Because for them to be able to take it to the retail market, they're unable to, because they can only sell it either in their own farms, amongst their own people. As soon as they go into the retail market, into the economic system, they must sell it to these large corporations. They're not allowed to sell that milk, but through so-called cooperatives, they're sold to the global markets. For example, Nestle is a big company, and that's the reason why you probably shouldn't eat chocolate. But that's another discussion, another time. So here we are, as we can see, how we are contributing to the suffering of people in different parts of the world. And an interesting statement was made at one of the lectures I was at, where a New Yorker said that, and it's true to the extent that New York has a very light environmental or ecological footprint. It is true to that extent. But what they forgot to mention, and I had to remind at the lecture, which got a standing ovation, which I was quite surprised, that's because the New Yorkers' footprint is in Africa. Or Southeast Asia, etc. So we have to be careful as to, when we understand this aspect of consumption and consumerism, that it's not as simple as walking into the shopping center and actually getting milk, because it's as if, it's not in my backyard, I can't see it, as if it's not actually happening. It is happening. I had some discussion over here about chicken production and cow production, but I'll let that go, because I'm sure you all know what happens to chickens. You all know what happens to the cattle. And Dr. Omar's here. I want it to be beautiful, because it's quite ugly. And I'm really hoping you do know what happens to those animals. So I jumped to the dust bowl. Okay. So let's, Dr. Omar has asked me to show it briefly, so let me quickly go through these points. A chicken, what we refer to as an organically grown chicken, ayam kampung, my favorite, it grows to its slaughter weight in 70 days. That's approximately 2 months. But the super chicken of the processed nature gets to that weight and greater in less than 40 days through hormones and growth hormones and much more in terms of its food that actually is processed. So it grows so big in half the time. The super chicken is 2/3 size, bigger in 40 days than the naturally grown in full 70 days. So that's probably how far we sort of are here. Like, oh, look at all of this. There's technology there, and we can make these chickens grow so fast and so big. So you get more for your money and things like that. But there's a real problem behind that. We now know that the hormones used in chickens contribute to problems like prostate cancer, cervical cancer, breast cancer. We have a reasonably large problem in South America called, I think it's called gynecomastia, if anybody can correct me on that. That is males developing breasts by the age of 9 or 10 because of the estrogen used in the poultry, and this actually is affecting them. So why wouldn't the chicken choose to cross the road? We move on to the chickens, moving on from there. So these chickens grow up. Let's look at what actually is happening to them. Firstly, the super egg layers. The female super chicken lives to lay more than 350 eggs per year. The natural chicken only lays 150 to 200 chicken. Obviously, again, through growth hormones, etc. And here is where we're going to start to look at some things ugly. the farmers, the industry really believes in gender separation for chickens. And what they do is they hold the female chickens to be very important because the male is essentially fed to cats and dogs after being live, crushed within 24 hours in order for them to actually now become pet food, etc. They're crushed alive, my dear brothers and sisters, not any other way, let alone that even other ways would be really problematic. Australia crushes approximately 120 million male chickens per year. America, about 270 chickens. Male chickens are crushed within 24 hours live, just in case we hadn't heard that. And the female does not go off easily because within 24 hours, the little chick that we see as really cute are debeaked within 24 hours with a burning blade, so that they don't fight and kill each other. The reason for them to be debeaked, so they literally take their beak and actually put it onto a hot blade. And these, when the chickens are taken off the hot blade and put on the side, they literally have their feathers. These are little babies, 24 hours old. Their wings are literally out like this because it's like, I'm so much in pain. What has happened? And then they are forcefully malted every 10 to 14 days when they actually grow up. The malting process is this. The reason why you get less eggs in winter, particularly in winter countries, summer countries, is that that's the time when the chickens actually regenerate its inner systems. And here, in the processed market, they go through a hard and fast fasting, where for approximately 2 weeks, they're neither given water nor food in order to accelerate malting, so that they can in fact start to add lay more chickens. And this is something that actually ultimately causes many of these egg layer chickens that when they no longer can lay eggs, they're also taken to the slaughterhouses and ultimately become the meat that we ultimately eat. There is a meat industry for chickens, without a doubt. That's also female only, by the way, because the male chicken for eating is apparently a bit too hard under our teeth. So the chicken industry, the female chickens are actually both in the meat industry as well as in the layer industry. I suppose we can briefly mention the cropping, because we often talk about, when we talk about these problems, we talk about these problems from the aspect of animals. I do want to briefly mention that some of the problems that actually occur in the actual agriculture, and this is where permaculture comes and provides a significant solution. I'm sure there are other solutions that in fact can be incorporated in the permaculture and other alternative programs over there. So what I'm going to mention briefly here is this, because time is running us by, is that the amount of fertilizers we're using in the ground is literally stripping the ground of its fertilizers ultimately. So the grounds are becoming literally sterile through pesticide and through fertilizers. The fruits that you have, like a tomato, has approximately, they say that it's 20 to 30 times less nutritional than an organically grown tomato. So there's something called a BRICS reader, so you can actually test these non-organic tomatoes with organic tomatoes and see how much of the nutrition is there. I don't have the time here to actually explain to you how a BRICS meter works, but you can invest in one and literally, in fact, to do it yourself and check out how weak your non-organic fruits are and vegetables as opposed to organic. Having said that, the organic market is also affected because the industry is not, they still have to grow on land which is not as nutritional, not as enriched. And that's where permaculture comes to restore, rotate, and heal the farms. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward greatly those who are involved in that. Briefly, the chocolate industry, just to let you all know that 80% of your chocolate actually comes from slave and
indentured labor systems. For your information, in Southeast Asia, 60%, 2/3 of your rice comes from slave farms, literally slave farms. I'm not using the term slave for impact. There are actually slaves. For example, from Philippines and Burma, in the seafood industry as well, in our own backyard here, called the Southeast Asia, from Burma, my dear brothers and sisters, we can cry for our brothers and sisters from Burma, and we should. But where are many of them who are escaping ending up at? They're ending up on ships, on boats, where they're not allowed to escape, and they're allowed to only sleep 2 to 3 hours a day in order to get you fish and prawns. And when they don't work, they're whipped like slaves were, and when they die, they're thrown off the boats. And not my words, there are 2 documentaries on BBC that you can see what actually is happening to the rice enslaved laborers, as well as the seafood enslaved laborers, and particularly from the Muslim lands, Philippines, Thailand, and Burma, our own dear brothers and sisters. And we must worry about everyone, all the way from Syria to the people in our own backyards over here as well. I won't speak much about soil depletion. We have spoken about it. The genetic modification farming systems, their claim was to give us more food, but this is not true. In fact, the yield is no different. And the Japanese that you mentioned, Salah, Fukuoka, exactly right. And he actually has a book called The Straw Farm, right? The One Straw Revolution. That's right. It's a beautiful book, and he shows through empirical farming, empirical measure of his farming, that there is no difference really. And in fact, natural farming methods produce not only better yield, but also sustainably greater amount of yield. I do want to briefly speak about the Dust Bowl, which was a result of agriculture in the United States. And this is the scene that you see where that's actually dust blowing around from different parts of the United States, literally up to the door height of an old car there. Houses, as you can see, halfway closed. Why? Because the soil became so loose from extensive, intensive agriculture that the soil became so loose and it simply blew and actually were collected in different parts of the world. Many people died because of the Dust Bowl in that regard. All because of you and I consuming. These foods are not going to the third world country, my dear brothers and sisters. They're coming to Sydney, Australia, and other places like that. And I am sorry to say it also does come to Malaysia. And here is 2009 in my own backyard, the dust storms of Australia, because of the same problem that actually is occurring in Australia. The impact of this is quite significant. That actually goes all the way across and in fact affects New Zealand, and as usually New Zealand is off the charts anyway, we can't see it on the presentation. That was a joke. I do want to add briefly over here for you to understand about the farming and the fires in Indonesia. We all know the fires. I won't talk much about it, but I want to bring to you a very important lesson about this in relation to consumerism. We talk about palm oil. What's this palm oil being used for? What is causing such a significant rise in the need of it? This is a serious problem. There are 3. These 3 things, again, connects to consumerism because they are not needed. They're essentially luxurious items. And for this reason, we are having some significant biodegradation in Indonesia, let alone the fires and the smoke that you actually have to deal with over here. I don't have the time to talk about the peat ground over there and how the Pacific Stream is affected because the peat land that is created through natural forestation and deforestation actually occurs in its cycle. That's the start point in Sumatra, where there's something called a Pacific Stream, which is the largest stream from which fish grow. And so the deforestation in Sumatra is affecting significantly the fish, the marine life, which is not being taken into account. But putting that aside, because it's underwater, we can't see it apparently, let's talk about three things that actually is in our own backyards. Number one, the highest use of palm oil is in something that is now sold as environmentally exciting, and that's biodiesel. It's fuel. It's fuel, my dear brothers and sisters. Just for your information, ethanol from the South American countries where people are no longer allowed to grow a corn for food, but they need to divert that corn to ethanol fuel so that you and I can have a car. And the significant increase of cars in Malaysia, 28% in the last 2 years. In the last 2 years, there are 28% more cars on the roads of Malaysia. So let's not talk about South America and Sydney. I have to worry about my own backyard. You, inshallah ta'ala, can also take some message and reflection for your own selves. So that's number one. Number two is processed food. Processed food. Palm oil is the choice oil in relation to processed foods. So whether it's dough-based or in terms of wheat and seed-based, to other kinds of processed foods, into ice cream, etc., etc. It's a significant market that the palm oil is involved in, such that the Sumatran peatlands have to be deforested, burnt, in order to have more palm grown, in order to give us more palm oil. And the third is cosmetics. Cosmetics, nail polish, etc. I mean, the fact that cosmetics is such a high consideration in this equation, that's a real problem, right? Real problem. So brothers, please, reduce your nail polish use. We all know the hadith over here. I just want to lead to the spiritual connection to all of this. We know the first hadith, but I just want to highlight to you that often we quote the last part of the hadith, that a third for food, a third for water, and a third empty for his breath. But really the Prophet ﷺ said that the son of Adam does not fill a worse vessel than his own belly. Sufficient for him or her is a few morsels of food that keeps his back straight. And the dispensation is, if it's not possible, a third for food, third for water, and third empty. And I'll speak briefly about this as to how we need to reduce our consumption, particularly food, because that's the start point by which we can, inshallah ta'ala, change and transform our lives towards a better well-being. And if our brains can fire better, then inshallah ta'ala we can actually also help for our hearts to fire better. The second hadith, very important in this regard, as to why the Prophet ﷺ said, be persistent in the knocking of the door of paradise for it to be open for you. And Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha asked, how do we persist, O Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? And he replied, through doing without food and drink. I will leave Dr. Umar to speak about some of the spiritual diseases if he can, inshallah, highlight that. But I'd like to end in showing you briefly how we can help ourselves to reduce our food intake. And I want to repeat myself here that when we speak of consumerism, our big consumer item is food. And if we can get that to control, inshallah ta'ala, other kinds of consumerism can also change. The first is, and this is actually from Imam Ghazali's work himself, the first is that we eat for satiation. This is for desire. There's no real change here. This is the reality that in fact we start from. And Imam Ghazali says that, this is a progression. Don't sort of start going and eating 2 morsels from tonight. It can hurt you. It can harm you. So there is a decisive, you have to make an intention, you have to have a plan to progressively, inshallah ta'ala, reduce the consumption of food. Briefly before I continue, just to let you know preemptively that food leads to many of the diseases of the heart. Okay, if you don't control that, the other things are not going to come in place. So the first thing that you need to do is to move to nutritional eating. As soon as you go to a nutritional eating, for example, do not eat chips and all those soft drinks and things like that, your pantry size will start to reduce as well. So as you can see how food consumption, the actual amount is reducing as well.
Then the third is to start eating ethical, not only organic but also ethical, to eat tayyib, halal and tayyiban, right? They come together to eat tayyib. And interestingly, when you eat ethical, it reduces your pantry by a great amount, because too many things are unethical, right? There's too many things that are unethical out there. And that's the reason why this is a process, that we know our problems, we know our shortcomings, and when we then take steps to change ourselves, because we have to, why are we going to change ourselves, by the way? Yes, for health, etc. But it must be that we have to meet our Lord. Don't forget what I have said in the beginning. Please don't go onto diet because you want to shape up. This is taking you back to dunya. But to do these things because you have to face your Lord, you will be taken into account, and take yourselves into account before you are taken into account. Tuhasibu qabla an tuhasabu. So eat ethical. And once you have been able to eat nutritional, and you have been able to eat ethical, you can then, inshallah ta'ala, eat spiritual. What is right with Allah, to keep your back straight. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to be nutritional in our food. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to be ethical in our food. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to be people who are spiritually awake, that we are people who are taking a journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with much purification, for nothing will face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and get His mercy except those who purify themselves. Jazakumullah khairan, and I apologize for the last photograph.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Afroz. Dr. Umar, the stage is yours.
Assalamu alaikum. Why don't we first stand up and stretch a little bit? Okay. And ground. And then we can sit down and start, inshallah. Bismillah. افتح علينا بحكمتك برحمتك يا ذا الجلال. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. There are many crimes that are perpetrated in the modern world, and we are conscious of crimes against humanity. Unfortunately, we are not conscious enough of these crimes. But perhaps in the eyes of God, the greatest crime of all, or one of the greatest crimes of all for sure, is the tyranny of human beings against animals and against the environment. And if you will see the animals that are in these feedlots, or the chickens that never see the sun, that are inside of these big houses, and the chicken industry is the most unethical of all. And these people usually who run the chicken industry have no concern about ethics whatsoever. You may find something like that among the people who produce sheep. They're usually the best. Next would come cattle. The worst are the ones that are involved in the production, mass production of these super chickens, as they call them. And if you look at the cattle, you look at the sheep, you look at the chickens, their eyes cry out to you. Can't you do something for me? Their eyes cry out to God that this is not what I was created for. You do not come from the earth, although you are made from clay, but you come from the garden of paradise. Your father Adam and your mother Eve were created and married in the Garden of Paradise. That is your eternal home. That is your garden. That is where we go back. This earth is beautiful. This earth is spectacular. It is also a garden. Whose garden is it? It is the garden of the animals. God created this earth as the garden of the animals and the sanctuary of the plants. And they have a right that is much greater than your right, that they live a certain way in this world that is merciful and natural and just. And in Islamic law, we have the rights of human beings, حقوق العباد, and we have the rights of God, حقوق الله. And actually what in the West we might call human rights, they're actually the rights of God, because they're not negotiable. And we have حقوق البهائم والحيوانات. We have in Islamic law the rights of animals and livestock. And they have rights. You cannot feed them what they were not created to eat. You cannot cut off their beaks. You cannot put them in feedlots where they live in stinking mud and they're filled with antibiotics so that they don't die before they get to the slaughtering house. Water in Islamic law is sacred. You purify yourself through water. God created everything that is alive from water. You are not allowed by the prophetic law to pollute water. It's not allowed. The trees glorify God. The plants glorify God. And we have to honor them and protect them. And there is a fire that awaits a portion of humanity who are the ones who violate these things and violate other parameters of God. And the garden and the fire are true. But we want to go back to our garden. And we don't want to make this earth our paradise, and in that turn it into hell for the plants, for the animals, through this irrational consumption, this idiocy that we're doing. We know we're destroying the earth, and yet we continue to do so. We simply cannot stop. And those who turn this world into a hell for animals will have a huge price to pay. In Islamic civilization, we were the most, or one of the most, environmentally conscious and harmonious people on earth. Even our architecture always is tectonic. Means it fits the earth. We didn't want, to cut up a mountain or to change a hill. We would build into the hill that God created. And everything we did was tectonic. It fit the earth. And although it was beautiful beyond words, it always pointed to the heavens and pointed to the trees and pointed to the earth and the water and pointed to the mountains if there were mountains. Whereas a lot of modern architecture, it points to itself. Here I am, look at me. Look at that satanic, demonic tower in Mecca that they built, saying, look at me, how big I am, how tall I am. This is not our way. This is the way of the Antichrist. And in Islamic law, we have a whole treasury that we need to be aware of. The best food is the food that is produced closest to you, as we heard tonight. What is the first requirement of an Islamic city for it to be a city? This is also prophetic law. This is Sharia. Sharia is the way that leads to water and to life. And our Sharia is incredible. What is the first requirement that a city must fulfill to be a city, to be incorporated? We don't study about this anymore, but there it is in our books, there it is in our tradition. The city must be able to produce all the water it needs for its people, and for its plants, and for its animals. And our cities always had plants and animals. The Islamic city was a garden city. And the first revolution, or one of the first revolutions in Islam, was agricultural, botanical. And I can't say whether it would be permacultural according to the standards of permaculture today, but we had vast biodiversity. And we complemented plants with plants. We understood these things. I've seen examples of it. Our cities were garden cities, and they had to be garden cities. Why? Because the second requirement of the Islamic city was that it must produce all the food it needs to live. You cannot rely in your city on imported food or water that is not naturally there. If you don't have a place that provides for you the water that you need, pure water, so that you can drink, wash your clothes, water your plants, water your animals, then you've got to look somewhere else. And if you cannot produce the food you need to live, you've got to look somewhere else. All of our traditional cities, Lahore, this city, Damascus, Cairo, Granada, whatever it was, they all had all the water they needed all year long. In fact, they usually had more than they needed. And they produced all the food they needed in their garden cities and around their garden cities. And if they didn't do that, then they are not validly cities. Does that mean, so we had to be self-sufficient, every city. And does that mean that we didn't have a market? No, our markets were the richest in the world, the best in the world. But they only deal in quality goods that are not essential needs of the city or the people itself. In a city like Tarim, which is a traditional Islamic city that produced all the food it needed and had all the water it needed, Tarim only had to import three things: needles, scissors, and razors. Because they couldn't produce that in Tarim. They could have if they wanted to, but that's not that important. They would import that. This is very important, very, very important. And our cities were filled with animals. And we believe that if you do not have animals in the cities, you won't have human beings either. Of course, there's certain animals that we eat, and there are other animals we don't eat. But if you don't have animals and you don't treat them well, you won't be a human being. You can't, and one of the main things that causes the dehumanization of the human being is to remove animals from their lives. Mind you, animals that are treated well, animals that we love, animals that we attach to. And then what happens to the human being when we don't see the animals we eat and they are tortured with a torture that is very likely to bring down the curse of God. Because they have a right to live differently. They have a right to graze and to roam and, to eat the food they were created to. And chickens are one of the most beautiful of all animals. And in permaculture, we use animals like the chicken extensively. Chickens will help you to grow your garden and to protect your soil, and they will also eat the pests that will destroy your crops, and they're beautiful animals. They're wonderful animals, but you've got to let them be chickens. You've got to let them move around, and you've got to let them see the sun and breathe the air. This is their right. You've got to make this world their garden. In the traditional Islamic city, what do you think was the most conspicuous animal? The dog. Even in Shafi'i cities, and the Shafi'is have the greatest restrictions on dogs of any madhab, because of very strict rules of cleanness, of purity. But the Shafi'is themselves write books about the dog and how important the dog is and how indispensable the dog is. And what did we do with our dogs? Of course, we had different kinds of dogs, but the most conspicuous dog in the Muslim city were special breeds of what you might call street dogs, but they were not wild dogs. They were street dogs that are supervised by special people who breed them and train them and watch them, and they live in the streets. And they're taken care of. And they're also cleaned up after. And they're very special breeds. And these dogs are essential to the hygiene because our garbage was organic. So they will eat most of it. They are also essential because they will eat certain types of vermin. They also protect the street from certain types of animals. They also will protect your street from robbers and thieves because they know who lives in the area. And if you don't live there, you will be barked at least, if not worse than that. Whereas if you live there, they know you. And the Muslims love these dogs, by the way. And they fed these dogs. And then they're also trained to notice if there is a fire. And if there's a fire, they will bark. These dogs are famous in our history. In the city of Istanbul, many Europeans would write about the dogs of Istanbul. How incredible they are. Intelligent. If you go to Istanbul today, you'll see that they have cats too. And in Istanbul, the cats will have, in old neighborhoods, cat boxes that are maybe 4 feet off the sidewalk. And they're very pretty, the cat boxes. And the cats of Istanbul, they're probably the most beautiful cats in the world. Again, because the people love them. The people take care of them. But we had cat boxes because dogs and cats don't necessarily get along. So the cat can always jump up to a box. And it doesn't have to worry about the dog. When the French invaded Egypt and Syria in 1798, one of the first things that Napoleon's armies did, Napoleon killed a scholar for every day that he possessed Syria and Egypt. And this is something that Taghraberdi, a historian, mentions. But a modern Egyptian historian, a woman, she studied this and she said it's actually true. Not that he would do, okay, who's the one today, who's the one tomorrow, but that if we take the average of the ulama that he put today, it works out to one a day. This is for 3 years until the British get him out of Egypt and Greater Syria, because the British want to be the ones who call the shots. They don't want the French to do that. But one of the first things that Napoleon did when he came into Cairo, and the Egyptian people, I mean, their hearts bled because of this, because it is so inhuman and so inhumane. He killed off the dogs. He killed off the dogs. Why would he do that? I actually don't know why he did that. I would guess that he did it because they don't like the French soldiers. That's what I would guess. Because our dogs protect us also. They will also protect us. He killed off all the dogs. Once in the history of the Ottoman Empire, the dogs would overpopulate. This always happens. They'll overpopulate. So what do you do with the surplus dogs? Well, you better do something humane. You cannot kill them. You have no right to kill an animal if you're not going to eat it, or if it's not harmful, like a rabid dog. So you've got to find those dogs someplace to live. And the French knew that Istanbul had too many dogs. So a French merchant came to the Sultan and he said, I would like to buy your surplus dogs and I'll pay you a good price. And the Sultan said, and what will you do with them? And he said, we will make women's purses. And the Sultan said, not on your life. These dogs will live. They were not created to be purses. And so he found an island, maybe in the Bosphorus, that was a good place for those dogs, and he took them and put them there. Animals in the Muslim world. We had awqaf. We had endowments that are just for animals, especially for old animals, because you cannot take an old horse and send them to the glue factory. You can't do that. And so we would have awqaf. In Damascus, for example, we had a beautiful waqf, or more than one, on the banks of that incredible river, I don't remember the name of it, that goes through Damascus, which used to be one of the most beautiful rivers in the world, but we turned it, especially the Ba'athists, they turned it into a black, stinking, polluted river. But it used to be pure, and it had to be pure. No matter what you do with your waste, you cannot pollute the water. And we had endowments by the river that were for what? For old donkeys, old mules, and old horses, so they can just go there and they can graze and they can rest and they can praise God, because that's what they do, and thank God for human beings that are humane, and drink the water. And is that efficient? You know, is that profit? Absolutely yes, because this wins the pleasure of God. Because we treat these animals as they are supposed to be treated in this earth, which is their garden and not our garden. You are the one who has a right to live here well until you die. This is who we were. This is who we were. What have we become? And what's most important is that we must be what we were and better. And we must be one of the leaders in getting the earth right again, and taking care of the animals again, and teaching the ethics and the theology of this. This is very, very important. Animals had to be taken care of in our cities. If you had horses and donkeys, you have to clean up after them, by the way. You can't just go down the street and leave their dung. You either have got to collect it when it falls, and we did that, and people do that, or, you know, and you have bags that do that, or you have to clean it up. And if you don't, you may be in the judge's court. But if your animal makes too much noise, then the judge may make you build a second wall on your stable, because we don't want noise pollution either. This is the way we were. In the typical Islamic city, we usually had walls, and behind our walls, we had houses. And your house, you can decorate as much as you want. And your garden, you can make the most beautiful garden on earth. Can you decorate your outside wall? Again, Islamic law has something to say about that. No. You paint it. It might be white. It will be the city's color. It might be white. It might be light blue. These were the colors that were common. But you cannot decorate your outside wall. Why? Because then we know who's rich and who's poor. And in the Islamic city, the rich and poor are able to live next to each other. And unless they know each other well and go into their houses, they don't know that this one's rich and this one's poor. And you've seen this in traditional Islamic cities if you've been to them. You go behind the wall and there is an ordinary dwelling or a poor dwelling. Maybe you can help them. Or you go behind the wall and there is a palace, like paradise. Incredible. You know, but this, we are not ostentatious in our wealth. And we don't do anything that will make the poor feel pain. We were a merciful people, and we have to be a merciful people. What if the jasmine in your garden grows over the wall into the street? Are you allowed to do that? And our judges would say, yes. Because it's not really ornamentation, it scents the street and makes it fragrant. And we want our cities, and our cities were fragrant. If you had an industry that produced smoke, such as a bakery or a hot bath, then you cannot pollute the city with your smoke. And usually they will locate you to parts of the city where, given the way that the winds blow and so forth, your smoke will not be offensive. If you're something like a tanner who is tanning hides, then also we usually put you on the outskirts near a certain city wall where the wind will blow the other direction and where the stench of the tanning will not bother the people. This is the way we were. And around our cities, we have green zones. Green zones are a very important part of Islamic law. We called them actually harim. Harim. So every city had around it a green zone, which was also a commons. It was not owned by anyone. It could not be developed by anyone. And it was just there for the city, the people of the city. The size of the green zone of a city is determined usually by a flock of sheep. Because sheep will be one of the most common animals in the city. After all, we do eat them, don't we? And we want them to be in the city so that we have them. We give zakat in sheep and goats and cattle and so forth. And, we have those in our city. We'll give them to the poor. I've got, more than my nisab, my minimum amount of cattle, so I have to give you maybe a 3-year-old male. Or maybe I have to give you a sheep, or for sheep, mathalan. So people will be given sheep, people will be given other animals. But usually we would say that if we take a relatively sized flock of sheep, and in the spring or in the fall, when the seasons are relatively balanced, how far can you march your sheep to the east And then another day the west, and another day the south, and another day the north. What is the Sayyid of the jihad? What is the Lord of the four directions? The east. The east. You orient. The east is the Sayyid. And Allah says in the Quran, they came from above them, min fawqihim wa min tahtihim, right? Speaking about the Battle of the Trench. Who came min fawqihim? They came from the east. Min tahtihim, from the west. And God spoke to Moses from the right side of the mountain. Janib al-Ayman. What's the right side? The south. The Quran is all like this, and the Hadith is all like this. East is the primary direction. South is the blessed direction. It is Al-Yuman. It is Al-Yemen, the place of barakah. The Ayman, and the Junub also. And the West is also special. It's associated with death, and therefore also with resurrection and the hereafter and the end of the world. It's not equal to the East. And the direction which comes in last is what? The north. There be demons there. Ya'juj and Ma'juj and a lot of other things. And we refer to the north as the Shamal, the left. And also, it's got the Oman, And the north is okay, but we never put the north at the top of our maps, ever. Wouldn't make sense. We usually put the east at the top of our maps, or we put the south. Who changed that? Oh, guess who? Guess who? Those people who live in the north, who became quite powerful in the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th century. They said, let's redo the maps. We want England up there. We don't want it down there. If we did a Muslim map, Sidi Imam Afroz would be very happy. And so would the Australians. They live in the southern land, and that means a land of blessing, a land of great good. In any case, we had green zones around our cities. And there you can go to picnic, you can collect firewood, you can dispose your garbage, which is organic, not plastic, and you can graze your animals. You can take your chickens out there, your ducks, and it will be determined by the distance that an ordinary flock of sheep can go from the morning and get back by night. We had green zones along the rivers. We had green zones along the rivers. We had green zones around the wells. Go to a traditional Islamic city, and you'll see that a lot of the houses have fountains outside, always running and collecting water. Why did they do that? Well, they're very kind people, but they didn't do it from kindness. They did it because the judge made them do that. Why did the judge make you put a fountain outside? Because in your house, if that's the case, you've got a well. And you're entitled to have that well. But everybody's got to be able to drink from your well. Because water is owned by all. And so therefore, you don't want them to come into your house, and you don't want them to be drinking from your well. Maybe a thief comes in the middle of the night and said, I'm thirsty. So you run some of the water outside so that they can drink at your wall. This is beautiful. This is really beautiful. Rivers have harim. So you cannot buy land on the banks of the river. And usually the harim of the river will be determined by the distance from the middle of the river to the shore at times when the river is at its, let's say, medium size, when it's not swollen with spring rain or melting snow, and when it's also not dry because of the heat of summer. So when it's at its, sort of average length, then we'll measure it, and that distance from the shore of the river on the land is common property. We do the same thing with the ocean, the same thing with the sea, but in a different way. No one can own the beach. No one can own the land along it. And this made for a really beautiful world. We also had sanctuaries. Hima, this is a big thing in Islam. The hima, that we have sanctuaries. Arabia had in it 50 years ago over 50,000 sanctuaries. Sanctuaries for particular animals, sanctuaries for particular crops, particular types of wheat, sanctuaries for particular types of trees, and just sanctuaries that are natural sanctuaries. These sanctuaries often went back into the pre-Islamic period. You have them also in the Yemen. In the Yemen, you had sanctuaries that still had in them trees from the Ice Age that had died out in other parts of the world. And we kept them in our sanctuaries. Sanctuaries were a big part of our civilization wherever we were. And then we had the rule, Man ahya ardan mawatan fahiya lah, that whoever brings fallow land to life, be he a Jew, a Christian, or a Muslim, they own it. Don't pay a penny. But this is fallow land not being used or developed, that is not in the commons. It is not in a harim, it's not in a sanctuary, and there may be other restrictions on it according to the fiqh. But if you find that land and you develop it, and our fuqaha will define what that development means. It might be digging a well, it might be putting up a fence, it might be planting an olive tree. You own it. And in fact, this principle of the law is one of the things that abolished the feudal system in Spain and Portugal and Sicily and anywhere else where we ruled. And it liberated the serf, the peasant. So Christian, most of them were Christians, or Jew, whatever they were, Muslim. Take your family, take your children, go find a fallow piece of land, bring it to life, and it's yours, and God bless you. And then that produced immense wealth. Immense wealth. And you cannot imagine the gardens that we produced in this process are beyond description. And this is another thing, when the Crusaders reconquer these lands, Sicily, Portugal, and Spain, one of the first things they will do is to reinstitute the feudal system, to take the land away from the people and also to destroy the gardens. Why would they do that? Because those gardens are so beautiful and they are so secluded that people can hide there also. It's very difficult to police them, but we didn't care about policing them. It's like, be free. One of our Spanish Muslim poets, whose name is Don Fernando Abd-Allah, he says, what did he say? Maybe I don't, La libertad andada por el país. He says it differently than that, but he said freedom walked freely through the land. And of course he's a poet and poets are romantic, but I say no, that's the truth. That's the way it was. Freedom in all Muslim lands walked freely through the lands. You could own land easily. You could produce easily. And this is our heritage. And this is our obligation, and it is one of the supreme societal obligations, Fardul Kifaya. And, we have to close now. But, these are things of the utmost importance. And that's why if the food industry, in my opinion, is the biggest crime. I was brought up, I'm from western Nebraska. My family lived around the sandhills. And the sandhills don't have many people in them. They are one of the most beautiful places in the world. They are very special geologically. The only thing like them is in the, what is it called, Pampas or something of, the plains of southern Argentina, where you have the gauchos. They're really beautiful. You have buffalo, you have antelope, you have rattlesnakes, a lot of those. But they're beautiful. We lived around that, and it was so beautiful. And my mother's family's from western Kansas. That's the picture you saw. And they lived through the Dust Bowl. In fact, my grandfather became really poor in the Dust Bowl because he was a farmer. And he knew how to farm. He could take the soil like this. I would watch him do it, and he'd say, it's time to plant. And here we're going to plant such and such. Okay? He knew that just by taking the soil in his hand. And the Dust Bowl came, and they were starving to death for 7 years. And people would say, go to Chicago, you can work in a factory. Go to California, you can pick fruit. And he said, no, I'm a farmer. And he said, I'll lose my family if I go to Chicago. I'll lose my family if I go to California. He said, I'll keep my family. And he said, the rain will come. And he waited, and he was the only one waiting. He was the only one waiting. That's our little friend. He was the only one waiting. And then when the Dust Bowl was over and the rains came, he was well-to-do before the Dust Bowl. But he bought up all the land around him because it was dirt cheap. And when I knew my grandfather, that he could live Kansas is flatter than a pancake, scientifically. And all the land he could see, was his. I remember sitting on the porch with him at night. I loved to go out there, and we would listen to the coyotes howl at night, little wolves. Oh, that was cool. And then we would discuss very important philosophical issues like, what is better, cherry pie or apple pie? I was always on the side of cherry pie. We have got to be conscious of these things. And I believe that permaculture, is one of the most important undertakings in the world today. Again, a Muslim city has to provide its food. Here in this beautiful city, and this is a beautiful city, but if you took, let's say, the Mandarin Hotel, you could grow on the side of the hotel with permaculture, because it will do that. Using the porches, using the side. You can also build special architectural devices. You could produce all the food that the Mandarin Hotel, with its excellent cuisine, needs for all the year in its restaurants. And of course, there's certain things like prawns and fish that you're not going to raise there. A city like Chicago, Chicago is in rich soil, which is really, because I can feel the soil. You know, it's like the soil is dead. And I drive out and the smells are not right. It's all genetically modified soybeans, genetically modified corn, nothing else. Chicago gets only 10% of its food from Illinois, which is a big state and a rich state. 90% is coming from elsewhere. The city of Chicago, if it did permaculture, which would take it, of course, commitment to do, and would take it at least 30 years to accomplish, it could feed itself. It could feed itself from the city itself. And in our cities in the United States, our inner cities are often disaster zones. And that's where the poor and the oppressed are suffocated. And with permaculture, we could turn the inner cities into garden cities. And we could employ the people. And as you may know, in the inner city of the United States, most of the people who are born there will go to jail. Most of them have been incarcerated. You know this custom that a lot of young people have today of wearing jeans that go down to the middle of their buttocks, and they don't wear belts. Where'd that come from? Our prisons, the American prisons. Because they won't let you wear a belt because you might hang yourself or hang somebody else or strangle them. And then their pants will be low. And so they just make it a style. That's prison style. That's prison style. And and most of the people in the inner city, the only way they can live is either crime or crime or crime. That's about it. And then if they go to jail, which is very likely to happen if they're not killed. You know, my wife is an African American. My wife grew up on the south side of Chicago. And my daughter, my older daughter, has very bad diabetes. May Allah cure her. But we had to take her to a hospital by emergency a few years ago. And I took her to a hospital in the inner city where one of the doctors is a close friend of mine. His name is Naveed Malik, an incredible man. And I wanted him to take care of my daughter. She was in an emergency state. So I went there, and then one of my sister-in-laws came to be with me, and then also, you know, one of my wife's nephews, a young man. And sitting there, it's mostly black, and on the wall was a poster of a young black man. And he looked very nice, and he had on something like a Muslim hat. They often do that. And it said, endangered species. And I didn't get it. I live in the suburbs. So I asked Damien, who is my wife's nephew, and I knew him from the time he was born. I said, what's that about? I don't understand it. He said, the black youth is an endangered species because of black on black crime in the city. And in 1 year, he was shot down in front of his house and killed. And we don't even know who did it or why they did it. He didn't have enemies that we know of. But he came out of his mother's house, and gang members, often they will kill just to join the gang. To join the gang, you've got to kill somebody. And he was shot in front of his mother's home, and he died on her steps. You know, I mean, this is, and then when these people go to prison, and they are released from prison, where they, you know, are on parole. They're not free to travel. So where are they on parole? In the same neighborhood where they committed the crime. So isn't it likely they're going to be back into that again? Absolutely. Again, we can solve that. You know, we can bring, of course, Islam, but also permaculture and also crafts. We were a civilization of highly skilled workers, men and women. We were a civilization of crafts, of snuff. And the crafts were usually Sufi tariqas. Every craft had a sheikh, whether they were gold makers or leather makers or, you know, whatever they were, tailors. They had usually sheikhs. And that's amazing. We can bring back crafts as well. And we can make the city live. And we have to do that. I know that the time is over. But I want to say just one thing, and I hope that in saying this, you won't be bewildered. Because it's a topic that might be difficult to understand. In traditional Islam, we have a metaphysics, which is called haqa'iq. Okay, you don't have to know that, and you don't have to believe it even, although you shouldn't deny it. What you have to know is aqa'id. You have to know the fundamental creed. That's the basis. Everybody has to know that. Everybody has to agree on that. What mulk and malakut and jabarut mean, you don't have to know that. Okay, that's haqa'iq. Okay, but one of the haqa'iq that we believed is absolutely true. And there are hadith for this, however strong or weak they may be. That you, the human being, are al-insanu saghir. And that world out there, all the animals, all the plants, all the birds, all the mountains, all the stars, all the cosmos, it is al-insan al-kabir. And we would say in English, you are the microcosm. We also say al-alam al-saghir, the little world. And that world out there is al-alam al-kabir. We have hadith from Imam Ali, karramallahu wajhahu, that talk about that. And this was a standard Islamic haqiqah. Again, it's not aqidah. It's not something you have to believe. I know it's true, but you don't have to believe it. Okay, this is a reality. You are the microcosm. That world is the macrocosm. What does that mean? It means, first of all, that you know that world. You can know that world. In modern physics, we don't believe in red apples, because modern physics is based on Cartesian dualism, which has radical separation between subject and object, and you can't bridge the gap. So we know that there are things we call red apples, but do they exist as such? We know, and we say probably it is a molecular structure that we perceive in our mind as a red apple. Even, is it three-dimensional, or do we perceive the third dimension? Most would say, no, you don't. You just get two dimensions, you make the third. Okay, this is pretty close to insanity. Okay, but the thing is, in modern science, you can never bridge the gap between the subject and the object. And therefore the object is always alienated. And one of those is God himself, who is the greatest of all others. And then the trees and the plants and the animals and the rivers. This is also important, that we have to have a theology of the environment, and we've got one. We've had one for 1,437 years. Okay, you've got to have that. And also what this means is that you are the blueprint of the universe. The universe is the blueprint of you. And therefore, in all Islamic sciences, what was the purpose of studying science? But to discover yourself. To discover yourself. Know thyself. And so Jabir ibn Hayyan, when he writes in chemistry, In the days of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, who was a Sunni Imam, without any question, and of Imam Abu Hanifa, who's a Sunni Imam, and Imam Malik. Jabir ibn Hayyan begins his books on chemistry with the praise of God. And then he talks about purification of the self. And then he said, if you don't relate to that, don't study chemistry. You're not qualified. Because why do we study chemistry? To discover about the blueprint from the blueprint. To know the secrets of ourselves. And of course, we will also make beautiful things. We will also know about chemicals and compounds. But that's not the purpose. And the purpose is not to be wealthy. And the purpose is not to be powerful. The purpose is to know yourself. And with microcosm, macrocosm, maybe you can figure out how that works. You are the blueprint of the world. You have a kinship relationship with the world beyond you. Okay, and let's end here. What is one of the corollaries of that? What is one of the fruits of that? This is very important. As Imam Afroz said, the world is overheating because we have a fever. In fact, we are the endangered species. And this is what we always believed. When you get yourself right and you believe in God the way you're supposed to, with correct aqeedah, you don't have to necessarily know the haqa'iq, but you've got your aqeedah right. Ash'ari aqeedah, Maturidi aqeedah. You've got it right. And you are upright, and you love God, and you serve God, and you worship God, and you do dhikr, and you have yaqeen, and you have husn dhann billah. Who benefits? Of course, you benefit. You'll be filled with light. You know, you will go to the garden, but the whole world benefits. You transform the world because you transformed yourself. You became worthy of being the son or the daughter of God's vicegerent on earth, Adam. And so the birds sing for you, the whales pray for you, and when you die, the whales will cry for you, as our prophet said. I mean, this world is amazing. This world is interlaced. The whales care about you, believing sister. The dolphins care about you. Even the sharks care about you because they live by virtue of you. You are the breath of the universe. Adam alayhi salam is the breath of the universe. And he has in him Nuru Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wasallam that radiates from him. We could talk about that at great length. We talked about the golden section. The Fibonacci series of numbers is what? 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and so forth. It begins with 0, creation from nothing. 1, the oneness of God. And 1, the first thing created, which is what? The light of your prophet, Ya Jabir. The most perfect of all things created is the light of the Prophet Muhammad and the Prophet himself who embodies that light. Nothing is more beautiful, nothing is more perfect. And the stamp of Muhammad, Barakatu Muhammad, is there on every atom, every piece of DNA, every flower, every leaf. And that's what this series shows us. 0, 1, 1. The only number that repeats is 1. The first one is God in his oneness as creator from nothing. And the second one is the light of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then 2, right, left. Contraction, expansion, male, female, the pairs. And then 3, first concrete number. And then 5, 8, 13, 21, and so forth. And out of that you get the golden section that goes through everything beautiful in the world. The dragonfly, the sunflower, the nautilus in the sea, the snowflake, you know, the bird of paradise and its tail. It's there in everything. The olive tree, the shape of its leaf, everything. God created this world perfectly, and He created you perfectly, and you've got to get that perfection working by getting in your body, being yourself, being grounded, and worshiping your Lord. And when you do that, you transform the world. And of course, we will clean up the seas. We will stop the food industry. By God, we have to do that. You've got to save these animals. Don't buy these animals. How could you eat them? How could you think that an animal, that has been treated and tortured like this, is going to bring you good? And they put all these antibiotics in it, you're going to get sick. And eat a sheep or a cow or a chicken that's been able to live, tayyib, and been sacrificed. You'll be healthy. You will be healthy. You know that. And then, as Imam Afroz said, you will think better. And you'll be able to move your intuitions into good habits. And you can't do that with bad food. And when the human being does not do this, when the human being forgets God, turns his or her back on God, and then lives a life of error and confusion and delusion, maybe depression and suicide, but the whole environment suffers. And the fact that the world today is in such a miserable state shows us that the human being is in a miserable state, and we really are not human beings except metaphorically. And most of us don't know God. Even most Muslims today couldn't pass Aqidah 101. They couldn't pass Aqidah kindergarten, much less to live it and to know it. So may Allah awaken us to the greatness of the legacy of the dark-eyed prophet, the beauty of Bani Hashim. And may He awaken us to the task that is before us, and let us get to work. And Malaysia, this beautiful country you have, this treasury that you have, this is permaculture country number one. A permaculture knows what you can do here with your environment, with your rain, with your sun, with your climate. Okay, and we can get it right. And we don't have to have oil palms everywhere. We can also have biodiversity, and Allah enable us to do that. The world needs you. The rainforest needs you. The Arctic Circle needs you. And now the permafrost is melting up in Siberia and northern Alaska and northern Canada. And this is going to release methane gases, and it is already. That probably will complete the melting of the ice cap in no time. This is not good, but you can turn it around. How? Get up and pray at night. Do dhikr. Purify yourself. Get all hasad out of your heart. Get your heart pure. And then things begin to change. This is what some people will call metaphysics, but it works. This is the way creation works. And we ask God to make us worthy of our Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Allahumma waffiqna lima tuhibbuhu wa tarda waj'alna min abidika as-su'ada wa amitna ala kalimati al-huda. Allimna ma yanfa'una wa waffiqna lil-amali bima 'allamtana bih. واجعل ما نحن فيه خالصا مخلصا لوجهك الكريم يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا بعده تفرقا معصوما لا شقيا منا ولا محروما. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. I am so happy to be with you. I am so honored to be in this beautiful land. May God protect you. May God protect this land. You must preserve the legacy of the Islam that made this land so beautiful. You must preserve that legacy, and you must bring it to life. بإذن الله تعالى. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.